Dear students, today we discuss about the law of diminishing marginal utility in continuation to the last lecture on utility analysis, meaning concept difference between the total utility and marginal utility. First, we understand the meaning of marginal utility. As we know in economics, utility is a bond satisfying power of commodity. So, the marginal utility of a goods or services is the change in utility from an increase in the consumption of that goods or services. So in this context of cardinal utility means when we measure utility in terms of utils, economics sometimes speak about a law of diminishing marginal utility, meaning that the first unit of consumption of goods or services yield more utility than the second and subsequent units, with a continuing reduction for greater amounts. Therefore, the fall in marginal utility as consumption increases is known as diminishing marginal utility. This concept is used by economists to determine how much of a good a consumer is willing to purchase, because the consumer willing to purchase a particular commodity depends upon the how much utility he derived from that particular commodity. Utility theories, there are two types of utility theories. The one is the law of diminishing marginal utility and the second is known as the law of equi-marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility explain economic behavior of a rational consumer, or they believe that a consumer is a rational being. So the Mr. H. Gaussian, a German economist, was the first in 1854 to explain the law, and hence it is called as Gaussian first law of consumption. Professor Alfred Marshall later on restated and propounded the law in his book Principles of Economics in the year 1890. The law of diminishing marginal utility depends upon the two fundamental principles. The first is the more we have, the less we want of it. The second is only a single want is setable at a time. Law of diminishing marginal utility. To see the definition of this given by Alfred Marshall, that is, when other things being equal, the additional benefit with a person derives from the increase in the stock of a thing diminishes with every increase in the stock that he already has. In simple words, we can say the consumer requires or consumes more and more units of commodity. The marginal utility derived from every successive unit goes on declining. To understand this law, we first see this utility schedule. On the left side, we have number of chocolates. On right side, the marginal utility measured in terms of utils. So as we know that as we consume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 units of chocolates, our marginal utility decreases. From the first unit, the marginal utility is 10. As we continue with the consumption of this chocolate, the MU keeps decreasing from 10, 8, 4, or 2. This proves that the stock of commodity increases, MU goes on declining. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that when the fifth unit of commodity is consumed or the fifth unit of chocolate is consumed by the consumer, the MU becomes 0. This is a point of maximum satisfaction or a point of satiety because it is totally satisfied with eating of these chocolates. When the consumer consumes the 6th unit or he goes on consuming, when even though he is satisfied, the MU becomes negative and that is -2. This indicates the negative utility or disutility. Diagrammatical explanation of law of diminishing marginal utility. In the diagram, as we say that x-axis represent number of units consumed and the y-axis represent the marginal utility derived from the consumption of units. The MU is a downward sloping curve from left to right, is indicate that increase in consumption of commodity leads to decrease in utility of that commodity. The point at which the MU curve intersects the X is called the point of maximum satisfaction or the point of satiety. Because in this point, the consumer gains the 0 utils because he is totally satisfied. At the point where the MU is equals to 0, if a consumer further go on for the consumption, the MU curve slopes down below the x-axis, indicating the negative utility or disutility. Assumptions. The size of commodity is reasonable, successive consumption, all other factors are constant, uniformity of units, normal or rational behavior, measurement, only single use, the MU remain constant, product or commodity is divisible. On when we talk about when defining the definition, the other things remaining the same. The other things are these basic assumptions. If they all assumptions are remain constant, then this law is applicable. Otherwise, this law is not applicable. Assumption number first, that is the size of commodity is reasonable. When we consume any commodity, it is not small or it is not very big. The size of commodity is reasonable or in a standard size. Then this law is applicable. If a thirsty person will consume a glass of water, not a jar of water. Similarly, he will not consume water in a tablespoon. If he consume a water in a teaspoon, so every second spoon gives me more utility. So this law is not applicable. This law is only applicable when we have a standard size of glass of water and then we consume the first glass of water, then second. So at the level will come then where utility will be satisfied. Okay. The second is successive consumption. The law of diminishing marginal utility assumes that there is no time gap between the consumption of unit. There is a continuity in the consumption. The unit should be consumed back to back. If there is a time gap in consumption, this law is not applicable because in that case, the marginal utility will not diminish. After a 1 unit of commodity is consumed, the consumer cannot consume the next unit of the commodity after 2 or 3 or the next day. The consumption should be back to back. There is no time lag. Then this law will be applicable. All other factors constant. The law begin with the word the other things being equal. That is, the law assumes that the factor affecting the utility of the commodity to be constant. The law also assumes that MU of each unit of money remain constant for the consumer. No change in price, income of consumer, habit and preferences. Uniformity of units. The law of diminishing marginal utility assumes that all the size of commodity being consumed are uniform. Or we can say that all the units of the commodity which we consume, they are uniform. They are some of identical in terms of shape, size, color, and smell. For example, if a commodity being consumed is as a Cadbury dairy milk, and then all other unit consumes are not Cadbury dairy milk, so we prefer another also. So, but in this law, we believe that if we are consuming the Cadbury dairy milk, so without any time gap, we consume only the dairy milk chocolate, not the other. If we change Cadbury dairy milk to dairy milk silk, this law will not applicable. Normal or rational behavior. In order for the law of diminishing marginal utility to apply it, it is assumes that the consumer is rational and he behaves normally. The aim of the consumer should be to maximize his satisfaction and he know better in what particular commodity he consume that will enhance his satisfaction. Measurement. Utility is a psychological concept and therefore it cannot be measurable. However, for explaining the law of diminishing marginal utility, Professor Alfred Marshall assumes that utility can be measured in terms of utils. So, or in terms of number. That's why it comes under the cardinal approach of measurement of utility. Only single use. It is always assumed when we apply this law, that is the commodity is used to satisfy only a single want. If a commodity satisfy many wants, the law might not apply as marginal utility will keep increasing. The consumer will keep using the commodity to satisfy his various wants. Assumption. The marginal utility remain constant. This is assumed that marginal utility of money remain constant throughout the period of consumption for consumer. If the MU of money changes due to increase or decrease in income, then it cannot yield the correct measurement of MU of the commodity. In short, the law will be not hold good. The product or commodity is divisible. The law of diminishing marginal utility assumes that the commodity consumed by the consumer can be divided into smaller parts so that it can be acquired, purchased in small quantities and consumed quickly. Exceptions. When we talk about the exceptions, these are the exceptions where these law is not work. So there are some commodities for which the law may not be applicable. Such commodities may be different from the different people. You may feel that you can keep eating your favorite chocolates, So the every second bite of your chocolate give you more margin, more utility than the earlier one. That means your MU is not decreasing, it is increasing. The next unit give you more satisfaction than the earlier one. If you have your favorite ice cream, or if you are watching your any movie, suppose a Three Idiot, very famous movie, and listening your favorite song, anything which you love, you do it because you want it again and again. In this case, this law is not applicable. This may be considered as exception to law. So there are some exceptions where this law is not worked out. The money is the biggest exception of this law of diminishing marginal utility. When we draw this law, we always keep that the MU of money, the marginal utility of money is remain constant. But that is not true. Because as your money stock increases, your marginal utility of money can be used to satisfy various wants. So money cannot be considered to be a real exception for the following reasons. Money does not have a single use because it violates one of the basic assumption of the law. The second is the marginal utility of money for a rich person reduces as his stock of money keeps increasing. Because in that condition, he value money, but the way he value money, that is a difference, the way he value money and the poor person values the money. Well, because the poor person, the 500 rupees means a lot. But for the rich person, the 500 rupees is just like 100 rupees or 50 rupees or 10 rupees. It depends upon your standard. It may be noted that the total utility of money can never decrease, and hence the marginal utility of money cannot be zero or negative. Even the rich person will never have zero or negative utility of money. For example, Bill Gates will not tear or throw away a note of $10 because that note still has utility for him, because that note has that ability to purchase something which satisfy his wants. So money has utility. So we always said that the utility remain constant. This is not possible. So this is one exception where the law is not applicable. The second is drunkard. The MU of alcohol keeps increases as drunkard keeps having more of it. So in this condition, we can say that intoxication increases with every peg of alcohol. However, the drunkard cannot be considered to be rational. The assumption of rationality is violated, and therefore it cannot be considered to be a real exception of the law. Then hobbies. If a person have a hobbies to collect the old coins, artifacts, paintings, gets more pleasure when he collects more of it. So the MU keeps increasing. So hence we said that this law is not applicable. Okay, music. This law is not applicable once you are listening your favorite music, because you are never ever be satisfied by listening of this. You every time you feel it, you just mean it that you want to listen this music, you just click and the music starts. So the real exceptions of the following reasons, after a certain point, the law of DMU, that is diminishing marginal utility, apply, the music becomes monotonous. So this law apply. Earlier it will not. As soon as we apply this, we also always said that this laws are not applicable to music. But every time you always hear a single one song, always it will become more monotonous. And once it is monotonous, you stop doing this. So the assumption of homogeneity and continuous consumption are violated here. Books. The MU, that is marginal utility of books, keeps increasing. For the scholar, his knowledge keeps increasing when he reads the books. Therefore, it can be considered as an exception. However, the scholar may acquire knowledge only on reading different books and not reading the same books again and again. So this assumption of homogeneity is violated, and hence this is not a real exception to the law. So we can say that this law is a universal law. This is applicable always. When we use more and more unit of any commodity, the marginal utility is decreases. A miser person who wants to accumulate more and more wealth, and he does not want to even spend it. Therefore, the marginal utility of money increases. For a miser, as a keep increasing. However, even we consider the law of assumption of rationality, it violates. It cannot be considered to be a real exception. Why it is not considered? Because a miser person not a rational being. Power. A person who has a power to influence keeps wanting more of it. The marginal utility of power keeps increasing as the person continues to get more power and more power. The greed for power does not end. Therefore, it can be said as an exception to the law. Again, it is not a real exception as the assumption of rationality is violated here. So if we see summarize these exceptions and how they violate the assumptions of your diminishing marginal utility. So if we talk about money, so we know that money has different use at the same time. So it violates the assumption of single use. If we talk about the drunkard, his not mental condition is not so good, so he is not considered under the rationality bracket. So the rationality assumption is violates here. Hobbies are different hobbies. Hobbies are every, if you have an hobby, you create more different things. So every time you create different things, your mu increases. So this is, in that case, you violate the assumption of homogeneity. Miser, it is related with rationality. Books, homogeneity, which is always you are not lie on the same books. You read books, but different books or different levels of book. Music, the homogeneity principle is always there, because every time you are not, you love listening music, but you not listening a single one song because it is very monotonous. So if you do so, the violates the assumption of homogeneity. Power, when we talk about the power, addition to the power, if we have agreed of the power, then we are not considered as a normal being. So the rationality violates, assumption is violates here. So in this way, this law is very important, and it is in behavior. When we see it, as we have something, or we have this more units of that particular thing, the utility of that particular thing is decreases. Suppose if we don't have car and we want to purchase a car, so we have a car. As our car utility derive utility, and it gives satisfaction. As our utility of or satisfaction of car or want will be satisfied, then we go for the next one. So every time, so we have a different cars, the 1 number car, 2 number car, 3 number car. So we don't go on purchasing of same type of cars. We go for a different brands or different some more additions in that particular car. So in this way, we can say this law is applicable always. Regarding, we have to keep in mind of the sum of this assumption. When we talk about the limitation, the law of diminishing marginal utility is not applicable to indivisible goods. Some goods are indivisible, especially the services are indivisible. So in divisibility is the reason why this law is not applicable, because a consumer will buy only the one laptop or TV or house or mobile at a time. There will not be recurring purchase of such items. Therefore, it not be possible to calculate the marginal utility on such goods. Impractical or unrealistic assumptions. The law of diminishing marginal utility has based on some various assumptions which are unrealistic, just suppose as homogeneity, rationality, consistency, successive consumption. These assumptions are impractical and unrealistic. Measurement of unit is not possible cardinally. Utility cannot be measured because utility is a psychological concept, subjective phenomenon, and hence it is cannot be measured cardinally. Therefore, the law assumes that utility can be measured cardinally is not practically possible. Utility can only be measured in relative terms, in numeric terms. It is assumption of single use not possible. A person may use one commodity to satisfy many wants at the same time. For example, if water we use for cooking, cleaning, bathing, and drinking. So this theory is not applicable here. So it is a very unrealistic theory. The marginal utility of money does not remain constant. This is a baseline of this theory, that it is not constant, whereas the theory assumes that it is constant. The law assumes that marginal utility of each unit of money remain constant. However, the marginal utility of money changes from person to person and some person and time to time. For example, the marginal utility of money for a beggar will be more as compared to the wealthy person. So, but we for application of this law, this is a very important assumption that the marginal utility of each unit of money remain constant, or we can say the marginal utility of money is constant. Then this law is applicable particularly. if we see the importance of this law, so this law is important to the government, to consumer, to finance minister, to producer, to monopolistic, and to understand the value paradox. So we take one by one. So to the government, if we talk about on the part of the government, this diminishing marginal utility concept is very important in framing the welfare schemes. So once we frame the welfare scheme, we see what type of schemes we have to apply or implement that will increases the utility of consumers, okay, and then or the citizens. To the consumer, the maximum satisfaction, they understand what is the point of their satisfaction and where they are satisfied, or stop consumption. So this is very useful for them. Or what type of goods are there, those who satisfy their wants. Finance minister, if we talk about the framing the taxation policy, how to impose the tax which will not adversely affect the person's purchase behavior. To producers, fix the price of the product. To monopolist, fixing the price, because monopolistic charges different price to different consumer. For rich, he charged the high prices, whereas for poor, he charged the low prices. So for this theory is very important. To understand the value paradox in economics, there is a difference between the value of use and the value in exchange. So if we talk about the value in use and value in exchange, we have two components here, the water and the diamonds. So the value of use of water is more than the value of exchange of diamond, because the commodity like water has a high value in use but no value in exchange. On other hand, the diamonds have high value in exchange but no value in use, because without water we cannot live, but without diamonds we can live. So this is the basic concept. So it is known as the water diamond paradox. The greater value is use is determined by higher total utility, and the greater value in exchange is determined by higher marginal utility. Thank you.